Are the legends of our ancestors nothing but fiction? Or could it be that the breathtaking myths have a kernel of truth after all? Why did people of the past know of fabulous places that never officially existed? Were the ancient peoples chasing a fantasy, or are we the ones who are closing our eyes to the truth? Have you ever heard of Havritmananaland? No? No problem. Then you haven't missed anything. Because if you follow the conventional wisdom, the legendary island never existed anyway. However, this basic assumption also raises a few questions. How is it that the so-called Land of the White Men was located by different Viking seafarers? And mind you, this was already around the year 1000 AD. Let's take a look at the Landnámabók, an old Icelandic text that is considered an important historical source. It says that a certain Ari Marsson reached the land after sailing west from Ireland for 6 days. In the saga of Eric the Red, we learn that Thorfinn Karlsefni's men captured 2 natives on their return journey to Greenland who told them of a land opposite their homeland. They said that the people there wore bright white clothes and carried long poles. Gunnleif Gunnlaugsson also claims to have seen the mysterious land with his own eyes. While its inhabitants spoke Irish, they wanted to enslave or kill the visitors from the north. But how should we classify all these reports and stories? Well, this is a question that even the experts argue about. While one side sees Havritmananaland as a purely fictional phantom island, the other believes that the myth has real roots. The Danish historian Carl Christian Raft, for example, was of the opinion that we are dealing here with the Chesapeake Bay, the largest estuary in the USA, which is surrounded by Virginia and Maryland. And what about the inhabitants mentioned? Well, some researchers think it's possible that they were Irish monks who had crossed the Atlantic. In principle, they would have been able to master this challenging task with their traditional boats, the so-called curraghs. And yet, so far we know of no archaeological evidence that clearly proves that the Irish brothers in faith made it all the way to America. The incredible secret of the North Pole. The basic assumption behind the next myth sounds quite plausible at first. Wherever magnetism prevails, there must be a magnet somewhere. And the larger and more widespread the force, the more powerful the magnet must be. And this is exactly what the Western European peoples of past centuries believed. They were well aware of the magnetic compass and now needed a plausible reason for it. In detail, the belief, which has since been propagated by scientific fact, was that a colossal magnetic mountain was enthroned at the North Pole. And there were indeed men who claimed to have seen the root of terrestrial magnetism with their own eyes. Here is an example from a letter written by the geographer Gerhard Mercator in 1577. In the middle of the 4 lands is a whirlpool, into which the 4 seas that divide the north empty themselves, and the water flows around and sinks into the earth as if it were being poured through a filter funnel. It is 4 degrees wide on each side of the pole, so 8 degrees in total. The only difference is that directly below the pole lies a bare rock in the middle of the sea. Its circumference is almost 33 French miles, and it is made entirely of magnetic stone. Also known as Rupes Nigra, which means black rock, terrible incidents are said to have occurred around the magnetic mountain. Among other things, it is said to have attracted the iron nails of ships and sent the crew to their certain death. Johannes Ruysch's world map from 1508 shows the exact location of the mountain at the North Pole, as well as the 4 countries and islands mentioned. And amazingly, 2 of them are even said to have been inhabited. The mountain even forms an independent landmass in the middle of the sea, suggesting that an ice-free, navigable zone existed around the North Pole. Before this theory was officially refuted, it enjoyed great popularity in the 19th century. And even if this story about the magnetic mountain is generally dismissed as a sailor's yarn, we should not forget one thing. Something similar to magnetic mountains actually exists. Probably the most famous example can be found in the Urals, with its huge magnetite iron ore deposit. Magnitogorsk Gora gave the city Magnitogorsk its name. Is this the home of demons? The sailors who approached this island to find fish and other food were so tormented by demons that they could not escape without danger. This entry accompanies a mysterious double island that first appeared on a map by the polymath Johannes Ruysch in 1508. Known as the Island of Demons, the Airy Island was to be marked in the northwestern Atlantic until the 17th century. But how much truth is there in this horror story? And what about the goosebump-inducing inhabitants? Well, the French naturalist André Thevet described them as follows in his Cosmographie, published in 1575. While the actual island was barren and secluded, it was home to abysmally evil spirits and demons. They made themselves known through incomprehensible screams that made your blood run cold. The map by Italian geographer Giovanni Battista Ramusio is somewhat more graphic. Here we see satanic creatures with horns and wings, as well as a gigantic bird of prey. Those who survived their trip to Demon Island said they only managed to do so by reading the New Testament aloud. But what do the official facts say about this disturbing corner of the world? Well, the situation is quite tricky, in the truest sense of the word. As the nautical position of the island has not been handed down, we don't know where it is supposed to have been. According to Thevet, the demons lived near the mouth of the Rivière St. Paul in Canada. However, the Canadian islands of Funk Island, Nova Scotia, and Bell Island are also suspected of being home to creatures you'd rather not get too close to. And indeed, even from a conservative point of view, it is not unlikely that the sailors' fears were real. However, the eerie noises were not the roaming of demons, but the sounds made by walruses during mating fights. King Arthur was buried here. It's a legend with a double bottom. The magical island of Avalon is passed down as a separate legend within the Arthurian legend. So while Avalon only appears here as a myth, it is said to be inhabited exclusively by women. In later myths and legends, it is sometimes said that King Arthur was nursed back to health on the island of Avalon after the end of his heroic deeds. But how do you find a place that is described as a supernatural realm, even in mythical history? Well, it's quite simple. You just have to travel to the small English town of Glastonbury. In fact, this place has been claiming to be the legendary Avalon since 1191. The reason for this is that a mysterious tree coffin was found in the local cemetery. In addition to 2 skeletons, it also contained a lead cross with the following inscription: "Here lies buried the famous King Arthur with his second wife Guinevere on the island of Avalon." Did Columbus discover the legendary Island of Gold? The following legend shows why Antilia is also known as the Island of the Seven Bishops. When the Muslims conquered most of the Iberian Peninsula in the early 8th century, the Archbishop of Porto and 6 other bishops took to the sea to escape the invaders. On their journey, the ecclesiastical dignitaries crossed the Atlantic before finally reaching an island called Antilia. They settled there and built 7 golden cities, which were under the special protection of God. However, this aroused the wrath of the devil, which is why he created the demonic island of Santanases in the north of Antilia. And although the bishops are said to have reached the refuge around the year 730, it took until 1424 before Antilia was immortalized on a map for the first time. According to this enigmatic document, the Island of the Seven Bishops is located at the edge of the then known world. It is part of an archipelago located approximately at the level of Gibraltar. Over the course of the 15th and 16th centuries, the landmass would find its way onto many more maps. And even Christopher Columbus was firmly convinced that the exciting legend had a kernel of truth. After the world-famous navigator learned about Antilia in a letter from Paolo di Pozzo Toscanelli, he dreamed of tracking down the mysterious island with its 7 golden cities. And according to the historian Petrus Mater of Angeria, Columbus actually fulfilled his dream. According to the book De Orbe Nove Decades, which was printed in 1511, Columbus therefore turned his ships eastward, supposing that he had found Ophir, whither Solomon's ships sailed for gold, but upon careful examination of the descriptions of the cosmographers, it appeared that both these and the other adjacent islands are the islands of Antilia. In this respect, however, historians assume that the author confused Antillia with the Greater Antilles, which Columbus actually sailed to. However, the report by Ferdinand Columbus, who wrote the following about his father in his biography, also makes us sit up and take notice. The island of Antillia is so rich in precious stones and gold that the temples and royal palaces are covered with slabs of it. And finally, there is the story of the Portuguese soldier Antonio Galvão. He stated that his sailing ship sailed through the Strait of Gibraltar in 1447 and was driven westward by a violent storm. The men finally reached an unknown island with 7 towns. The inhabitants of the island asked the sailors whether the Moors, from whom their forefathers had fled, still ruled Spain. Before returning, one of the men picked up some sand on the beach, from which a considerable amount of gold could be smelted in Lisbon. Do you love learning about the most exciting myths and legends of all time? Then press subscribe and never miss a video again.